So the reason that we want to talk about housing is because it is front of mind for everyone, but I think it's shaping up to be the biggest election issue. So the next federal election will be on or before the 27th of September next year. So we're hurtling towards an election. Labor focused on supply. They are doing the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund to build more homes. They've got that target of 1.2 million new homes over the next 5 years from the 1st of July 2024 to 2029. We haven't even entered the measurement period yet, and everyone is pretty confident we're going to miss it. The Liberal Party's budget reply, they made housing pretty central. They're really so if Labor is focused on supply, build more houses, the Liberals are focused on demand, reduce the amount of people trying to buy. Permanently reduce migration numbers was the big tentpole from Dutton, from 185k permanent migrants each year to 140k for the next 2 years. Senator Andrew Bragg also wants to allow first home buyers to drain their super, which actually would increase demand.
Yeah, that's not a demand.
Yeah. Anyway, that's a separate policy. So all of this talk of supply and demand and housing got me thinking about the empty housing data. Do you remember that from the census?
Not really, no.
So 2021 census revealed that 10.1% of Australian homes were unoccupied. So that was 1.043 million homes were unoccupied on the night of the
Including
census.
units?
Yeah. Just housing
Everything.
dwellings. Yeah. Which is pretty crazy when you think about it. We're trying to build 1.2 million homes over the next 5 years, and on census night there were 1 million homes unoccupied. And so I was thinking about that, and then I also saw this article about ghost homes. So the ABS released a report, and then the Daily Telegraph jumped on it and created the label ghost homes. 43,000 in New South Wales, 22,000 in Sydney alone, just unoccupied homes, not because of, second homes for holiday houses or people were traveling or anything like that, but actually abandoned homes. And so all this abandoned home stuff got me thinking about the census data, and I actually wanted to just dig into this number and understand it a little bit better. Is there actually something here, or is it just something that doesn't actually offer a way
Alternative,
forward?
Yeah.
So, first of all, 10.1% of homes in Australia were unoccupied on census night. That number isn't actually out of the ordinary. Here is it going back to the start of the 1980s from the census. So 10.1% in the 81 census, 10.3% in 86, 10.3% in 91, 9.4%, 9.2%, 10.4%, 10.7%, and then 11.2% in 2016.
Pretty consistent.
So it seems super consistent that Australia has just a heap of empty homes. And so for me, the two questions that come out of that are, how many of these primary residences either owned or rented out that were just not occupied on that day for whatever reason? People were traveling or something. So like, are they actually homes that could help alleviate the housing crisis? And then secondly, where are they located? Because empty houses in beach towns aren't as helpful as empty houses in capital cities.
Yeah.
So to answer the second question first, it's not just holiday homes in regional areas. Taking from the 2021 census data, Sydney, 8.3% of homes were unoccupied on census night. Melbourne, 10%. Brisbane, 6.8%. Adelaide, 7%. Perth, 8.5%. Hobart, 7.3%. Darwin, 9.6%. Canberra, 6.6%. To start with, there's a lot of empty homes in capital cities. Yeah. At least there were on census night. But unfortunately, a lot of housing experts say this isn't actually a stock of homes that we can draw on. So they look at some of the numbers and they say the majority of it is people just not being at home on census night. It's like more than 40% is just people traveling or not there. So then the remainders is like, there's a percentage of houses that are for sale. There's a percentage of houses that are in disrepair, and some other things. I think there is like a percentage of vacant homes that could be freed up for housing stock, but it's not nearly 10%. Now, towards the end of this segment, I have 3 policy recommendations.
Okay.
And one relates to the whatever that percentage of housing stock is. But my initial excitement about that 10%, where it could be, it very quickly fizzled.
Yeah.
I think there are some policy decisions that could be made because, so then I was like, oh, how do we compare internationally? Like, is this just uniform throughout the world? In the US, vacant homes in 2022, 10.5%.
Okay.
The UK, 6.1%. In England, 8.2% in Wales. France, 8.2%. New Zealand, 5%. Germany, 2.5%.
Oh, wow.
So I think there's probably some policy tweaks that you could make to get to Germany levels. But really, from everything I could read, there's not like 500,000 homes that we could unlock.
Yeah.
But when I was reading it, there was something that could be unlocked.
Okay.
Another potential solution to the housing crisis. We shouldn't be looking at abandoned homes. We should be looking at abandoned rooms. How crazy is this? For data from the ABS, Australia has 13 million empty rooms.
As in like a 3-bedded house, only 2 beds used.
2 being used. The ABS survey on income and housing revealed that nearly 76.8% of households, totaling around 7.4 million houses and apartments, have surplus bedrooms.
Yeah.
Now, look, I'm going to say that 1 surplus bedroom seems reasonable. You might want guests to stay. You might have a carer that needs to stay, but obviously if the carer is staying there then it's not a surplus bedroom.
Yeah.
You might have kids returning home, and you coming and going and you want an extra bedroom for them. Plenty of reasons. But 2 spare bedrooms, 3 spare bedrooms, more? That's now I'm starting to question you. Here are the numbers. So 32.5% of households in Australia, this is houses and apartments, have 1 bedroom spare. 31.8 have 2 spare bedrooms. That's more than 3 million homes. 12.5% have 3 or more spare bedrooms. That's 12.5% of all homes in Australia.
Yeah, but
that's
so much of this is legacy, though.
That's 1.2 million homes.
Yes.
They're just hoarding bedrooms.
That was the Australian dream. Still is.
Well, the Australian dream for most people now is affordable housing.
I think you'll find if you cut those numbers to houses built in last X years versus, X decades, you would find it might be a bit different. At least houses are a lot smaller.
You're saying we're building smaller homes.
Yeah. I think.
But look, that could be true. But 13 million bedrooms not being used, even if you could halve that, and you could free up 7 million bedrooms.
Yeah, but it doesn't match with the one above. Like, you'd either have to force people to sell or live with each other.
You could try and use policy to incentivize both of those things, which I'll get to in my policy prescriptions. Now, the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute research suggests that the majority of spare bedrooms reside with older homeowners. Mm-hmm. Not surprising. The age brackets 55 to 64 and 64 to 74. And not surprising because they probably have had families. Those families have moved on and they've kept the house. But we do make policy choices around incentivizing people to keep large family homes and then not rent out bedrooms in large family homes. And this is mainly to do with the pension assets test. So the primary resident doesn't count. The primary residence doesn't count for your asset test for your age pension. So there's an incentive to put as much of your wealth as possible in the primary residence, because then that is excluded from the calculation. But also, if you have a spare bedroom, you pay income tax on the rent received from leasing those rooms or Airbnb-ing those rooms. And so for pensioners, if they were to lease or rent out short-term those rooms, that would then be income that reduces their access to the pension, reduces it they get. So we make policy choices around that incentivize people to have a massive primary residence and then not create housing with their spare rooms.
Yeah.
So, as much as it is the way it is the way it is because we made it the way it is. And we continue to choose for it to be that way. So as I said, 3 recommendations, not a solve for the housing crisis, but tweaks we can make. First recommendation, let's start collecting data on why these dwellings are unoccupied on census night. So 10.1% of dwellings were unoccupied. We used to collect data on why that was the case. The last census we collected that data was 1986. So first policy prescription is pretty simple. It might be hard to get that data, but let's start collecting why. In 1986, a quarter of vacant homes were holiday homes and 35% simply had the resident absent on census night. But let's find out what is going on. How many houses are abandoned? How many are just being sat on for the capital gains? Let's actually understand what's going on. Second policy recommendation, use tax policy. Let's have a prohibitively high tax on truly underutilized homes. Like if it's not, you're preparing it for sale, you're fixing it up, it's a holiday home that you live in part of the year. Like if it is just an empty home that you're land banking, let's tax the shit out of that.
Yeah.
I would also say, and this is going to be controversial, right now we allow negative gearing for policy reasons, which is cheaper rent. If we didn't allow negative gearing, the first thing that would happen is landlords would increase their rent so all houses were positively geared. So that's a policy decision we made. I would say you could quarantine it to those policy reasons and maybe don't allow negative gearing on Airbnbs. Prioritize long-term secure housing. Just something to think about.
Tough to regulate that.
I mean, every regulation's tough to regulate.
Yeah.
But you'd be pretty easy to see, like, the occupancy rate. Oh, I mean, actually, it's not tough to regulate. Do you have a lease lodged with the state regulators?
True, yeah.
Yeah. Just something to think about. But, what we want to do is increase long-term secure housing, not short-term rentals here. And that would just incentivize landlords to go long-term leases over short-term rentals. Third policy recommendation, encourage pensioners to use their spare rooms or to move. People don't like the aged divide, but you could really incentivize pensioners if you offered 100% tax-free rental income on spare rooms, encouraging them to contribute those to the housing market without the financial burden of having their age pension reduced.
I mean, you can understand why it's reduced though, because they're getting more income. So it nets out.
Yeah, but what we want is to increase housing here.
The main thing you're going to have to convince is your grandma to take on a 21-year-old who's at university and wants to party all night.
Well, to be honest, I think what we really need to do, and the government have already started making moves. In 2022, they passed a law around encouraging people to sell their homes. So if people on the age pension sell their primary residence, there's a deeming rate. So your assets, it's deemed to get a certain return. And the money that you make from your sale of your house, rather than being deemed at 2.25%, at the time it was deemed at 0.25%, which is, I guess, trying to incentivize people to downsize. But for me, that's the opportunity. It's what else can you do to downsize? That's sort of the carrot that they've passed. But is there potentially a stick where it's if you are sitting on empty rooms, perhaps it does somehow, there's some deeming rate that it does contribute to your assets test. There's an income deemed from those spare rooms that you're sitting on, and then that does reduce your income. So all of a sudden there is an incentive to downsize. For me, it's there's this stock of housing that isn't being utilized. We're in a housing crisis. What are the things that we can do creatively that doesn't rely on let's build more homes in the next 5 years when we know we're not going to reach that target?
The question for that will be, are those the homes that are needed the most? The 4-beddy that the grandma has?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Or is it the 2-beddy that
But to be honest,
they would downsize into and have the money to afford before Ren and Alice go and bid on it? For example.
It's a good question. But think about how tough it is for young people to get rentals these days. And the family home, location-wise, it might be an issue. But we lived in a 4-bedroom home when we were renting.
Yeah, early
as
days.
students.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But that's still owned by
It's not about ownership. For me, like it's rent or buy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Like if you could massively increase the stock of rentals, I think that's a win.
Yeah,
Because
definitely.
then like the pricing pressure will be off
Definitely.
rentals.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
So I didn't solve the housing crisis, but there was a bunch of data that I did a deep dive on and I wanted to talk about.
I mean, I understand the point about negative gearing, but if you got rid of it completely, grandfathered it so it didn't impact, but from here, like, it would have a significant effect, I reckon.
I'm actually skeptical that it would.
Because I think a lot of people, like, I think you'd just get a...
I think it would be fair. Don't get me wrong, it would be fairer, but in terms of solving the crisis, like, what's the mechanism that it would actually...
Well, you'd probably just, I don't know, at certain levels of the market, just take out pure investors. Like, think about those people who have multi-property portfolios. It's all off.
But the thing is, investors would
gearing.
still buy the properties, but they just couldn't negatively gear it. So they would positively gear it. So rents would go up. But they would still expect capital growth. Like, investors are buying it because housing has been such a good investment asset. Changing negative gearing doesn't actually change that.
I reckon there would be a dynamic between, like, you just couldn't charge the rents that...
Yeah, well, then that's the
like
question.
you couldn't positively gear it. You'd be looking at trying to charge 10 grand a week in rent.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're saying. The problem is with the rental market so tight, but you know what
I mean.
Yeah. I think one part of Australian economic history that's often forgotten is we did remove negative gearing. We removed it for like a year in the 80s, and then the government put it back on.
There you go. Impossible.
My theory is that if we removed it today, rents would go up before house prices go down, just a sequencing thing, and that would hurt.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
So don't get me wrong, I'm not a fan of it. And I think from a tax fairness point of view, there's a really strong argument to remove it. But I think in solving the housing crisis, I don't think it's to solve the short-term solve we hope it would be.
Yeah.
Whereas those spare bedrooms, get them on the market.
Yeah, I don't know if I see it, but some really interesting numbers there. I didn't realize the extent of which there are open homes or empty homes sitting there. I think when you do compare globally, it's it's not just our problem, but yeah, empty bedrooms. I just couldn't convince my grandma. I know. It's not, but I get it. There's opportunity there. Yeah, yeah. Well, you should have put in commercial property in here. How many empty office spaces are sitting in
there's a
CBD?
There's an office building in Melbourne that they converted to residential.
Perfect.
I think it's a good call.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you have some comments on rents,
hit me up. I'm actually going away for 3 weeks, so that's why we did this episode now. So hit Bryce up.